Hello, can you hear me okay at the back? Can you hear me okay at the back? Just give me a signal. Thanks very much. My name's Chris Maguire. I'm delighted to be hosting today's event. We've got 4 speakers, one that's dialing in remotely as well. Because of time and time's against us, I've got a bit of housekeeping as well. Can you avoid any standing ovations in the next half an hour? Just if you're tempted, don't bother. You know, we need to move this thing on really, really quickly. I say I'm the editor of, or the executive editor of Business Cloud and TechBlast. Cybersecurity, big subject. The topic of today is cybersecurity. There's no such thing as too much security. Not my words, but the words of anyone selling cybersecurity, it would seem. Let me introduce our panel. We've got Ed Hayes, Data Protection and IT Partner at TLT. Daniel Dresner, Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Manchester. And Harman Singh, Managing Consultant at Cyphere. And also you heard her in the previous discussion, Elvira from the University of Manchester. Just going to ask a couple of questions about a project that she's working on. Ed, how are you? I assume that's Ed, otherwise there's a guy behind the back there with a huge head standing on a box, you know, poking through. So Ed, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Chris. You've got a Big Brother effect, I think, looking down on you all from Bristol.
Ed, well, you don't need a chin, quite honestly. So, Ed, you're not here. You've got a chin. Ed, you're not here today because of the train strike. So you're dialing in from Bristol. Let's set the scene first of all. You know, are there more cyber attacks now than ever before, or is it just a question that people are reporting them more than they did before?
Yeah, Chris, I think there's 2 things going on here. There's more connected devices, there's more connected companies. Globally, there are more internet connections. So naturally, there are more cyber attacks occurring. What we've seen in data protection terms, since GDPR came into effect 4 years ago now, is basically there are enhanced obligations to report breaches and cyber attacks. So a natural impact is that we're just seeing more reports. We've certainly seen in the last 4 years about a 33% increase in the reports of data protection breaches, which show a cyber aspect.
You just mentioned GDPR. Obviously, it was come up with in 2016. It became law in 2018. The threat was that people could be fined 4% of their global turnover. It's not really happened, has it?
No, that was bad lawyers and bad consultants trying to scare people into buying solutions they didn't need. Reality, biggest fine to date, British Airways, 20 million. That was about 0.2% of their global turnover. ICO just isn't fining anywhere near the level it is permitted to fine. This year, we've seen 17 fines issued. Average fine about 75,000. Those fines relate to a period when there were about 4,500 breaches reported. So you've got 4,500 reported breaches, 17 fines, average of 75 grand. It's not happened. The ICO has taken a much more collaborative, less punitive approach than people were suggesting might be the case back in 2016 to 2018.
You mentioned BA 2018.
Yep.
There was a data breach, a data leak of 400,000 customers' details as well. Why was that such a game changer? And from the point of view of lessons that we can learn, what lessons can we learn from BA's mistake?
I think the really interesting thing with BA is if you read the monetary penalty notice that the ICO issued, is the things it picked up on. It didn't say BA you failed because you didn't have best-in-class gold-plated cybersecurity arrangements. It said you failed because you didn't have appropriate security arrangements, and you failed because you didn't even turn on the things that were in your repertoire that were available to you. You had the technology to turn on multi-factor authentication, which probably would have stopped the attack at its outset. That wasn't switched on. There was just bad hygiene. You know, there were passwords, admin passwords, giving access to the whole of their network and apps stored in plain text files. So once a hacker got in, it was not incredibly easy, but it wasn't complicated for a sophisticated attacker to get access to information. Security monitoring wasn't switched on and wasn't used properly. So all these factors that BA had in their locker, they just didn't, they weren't deploying properly. So they enhanced their own risk of really negative consequences should they be subject to an attack. And that's what the ICO really focused on. Not is a company doing the absolute gold standard in cybersecurity, but is it doing what's appropriate to the risk it faces?
So Ed, Well, I'm right in thinking that the BA breach went on over a period of months, undetected.
Yeah, it did. It was around about a 2-month period. Unfortunately, some of the juiciest information in the penalty notice, is redacted for, ironically enough, security reasons. But yeah, around about a 2-month period before BA became aware of the hack, that they'd been that their network had been compromised.
But the lesson that other businesses can learn from BA's demise is that there's no point in having the equipment if you put it in the top drawer and forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's no point writing all these beautiful cybersecurity and data protection policies if you simply don't follow them. BA had policies written down saying admin passwords shall not be reused between different different apps and different accounts. But there was widespread reuse of passwords within BA. So once this hacker got in, he was able, it wasn't a brute force attack. He was basically able to start to reuse a password and get wider and wider privileges and change the settings on apps he had access to and on parts of the network he had access to.
Yeah, here's a quick question for you. You know what the most common password is, number password, for a house alarm?
I'm going to guess at 1, 2, 3, 4.
Exactly. So if we break into your house, that's the first number that we're going to try. The point is that as humans, we're fundamentally lazy. We just use what the factory setting is. So is the weakness the technology or is it the human, Ed?
It's the human. Again, I might be a bit of a data protection geek, but I think the ICO reports, if the statistics they publish quarterly on their website about the breach reports they receive, are really illustrative. You look at the last 2 years, about 7,500 cyber security attacks have been reported to the Information Commissioner, and about half of those are just phishing attacks, where individual staff members at companies have responded to a phishing attack. The majority of the remainder of that 7,000 also have got a significant human factor in them. It's humans all the time. Lack of training, lack of awareness. Even if companies roll out the best possible cybersecurity arrangements, if you've got that human factor involved and people aren't trained and aren't aware, things go wrong. And that's what we see time and again in the reports that come through to the ICO.
Just 2 quick questions before we come on to Harman Singh at Cyphere. The first one is that there's been this big movement towards working from home during COVID. Has that weakened people's cybersecurity systems in your experience?
Yeah, look, one of the things we most frequently see with clients is again, it goes back to that human factor, but people are using their own devices, they're working from home, they're finding workarounds. They're connected to a VPN, so it's difficult to print at home on their home printer. So they just email materials to their Gmail account, to their Hotmail account. It's those sorts of workaround behaviors that are bypassing normal security. The other aspect, you've got something like Zoom. Companies would normally go through a 6-month period with loads of assessments and risk profiling before rolling something out like Zoom. March the 23rd, 2020, companies were doing it in 24 hours. So the sorts of risk mitigations and management that ordinarily happened, I don't think was put in place back then. And I think in a lot of cases hasn't been mitigated since then.
One word answer, can you have too much security?
Yes.
Well, we'll come back to that. I wasn't expecting that, Ed. That's like a cliffhanger, that is. That's like an EastEnders cliffhanger, that one. Harman, okay. That was a good answer. So Harman Singh, Managing Director at Cyphere, you spent 7 years as a Senior Security Consultant at NCC Group. Just tell us what you do now.
First of all, thanks to NCC. I think that's one of the biggest examples we got from Manchester, which is at a known name at a global level in this domain. So right now we are a cybersecurity consultancy. So we find faults in you, just like your mum. To translate it easily, we pick up on weaknesses in people, process, and tech, because I highly believe you can't just blaming people all the time, because they are not the weakest link. They could be the strongest link if they're on your side. So it's more about promoting cultural changes at the ground level and then making sure you got right processes and the tech. So these 3 pillars are the success to security metrics here.
So Ed just mentioned phishing as a which has been around since I was a kid, which is saying something. You know, some of the cyber attacks that we've seen, you've got cryptojacking, you've got ransomware, which is the big one, of course, and you've got threats to data like data breaches, which is what BA came a cropper with. Just give us an assessment of what the picture is at the moment.
There are 2-3 things in your question, so I'll dissect it. Let's go on the other side of the fence from cybercrime side first. So phishing is one of the easiest attacks in terms of the economy. If we study the economy of cybercrime, the attack infrastructure and the whole cost, end-to-end cost, is pretty low, and the returns are massive on this in terms of success. So that's why it's so successful, because online, anybody can be online, you can hide your identities, you can still mimic the websites and carry out the attacks just like a legit website. And the cross-border regulations don't control the criminals on the other side of the world. So they have that loophole to exploit. But on this side of the fence, I think cybersecurity has uniquely embedded into our lives as well, not just businesses. So that sort of cyber hygiene is needed on the both sides, personally and professionally. So if we keep that little bit of a difference in the way our habits are, whether we are buying something, whether we are uploading pictures of kids, or, I don't know, your photos, or on Twitter, that's the simulation exercises we carry out on our customers. So let's take an example here. A company has hired us to carry out what's known as red teaming. Basically, they won't tell you any information, and you have to simulate an attack on the employees or the assets. So we first profile people associated with the business, and then you profile their accounts. And then based on the photos, if there's let's say, geotagging enabled on the photos, you can actually pick up on the location of the employees. So you can use those traits to figure out if somebody is traveling or if somebody is stationed to the nearest office, and then further profile that. So people are a critical element, but I don't believe in blaming people as the problem, because there should be other layers, what we call defense in depth principle in cybersecurity, that should kick in. If somebody has clicked on email, then that's not the end of the world. You know, there should be technical controls, there should be processes. You need to learn how to contain and limit the impact of an incident, not just be there and create more fears. I think
when you say about, you know, testing the employees and the staff, coming up with scenarios, presumably if somebody should be in Manchester and they're in Bali, you'd find that out.
Oh yeah, because let's say if you're given an office phone, or you're allowed to use your personal phone to tweet about something, or you could be doing personal feeds on some other platforms. I don't want to blame Twitter here. So through photos or through tagging your friends, through other people, you could give away your location. So you can always try other attack vectors, like, let's say, voice phishing. We call it vishing. So you could be a voice actor asking for password resets or any sort of information that can be derived from the customer teams of the organization. And if successful, that password reset could be down to your favor. And then given the portals or the access to the customer systems or your internet or intranet, you could be in a company's network. So that's what we do.
Zero-day attacks, right? Okay, so that's when a hacker manages to exploit the vulnerability before software developers can fix the problem. Is that a big problem? Are we at that level of sophistication, would you say?
I'm just assuming everybody knows zero-day attacks, but I'll just explain in one-liner. So zero-day attacks are if a weakness has been figured out by someone, let's say security researchers or intelligence agencies, or it could be anyone in the world. Before the vendor fixes that flaw is a zero-day. Zero-day attack would be if somebody takes advantage of that weakness. And now zero-day attacks have gained more popularity than they deserve to be, because, I don't know, maybe it's the fancy side of the security, but zero-day attacks, out of the statistics, if you take out in terms of security incidents, are only a tiny fraction. The most number of attacks are on the basics. Lack of basics, I would say, is why the attacks have been happening.
So it reminds me, actually, when I started my career, whenever you had a problem with your IT, whether it was security or anything else, the guy on the phone just said, have you turned it on and off?
Turn on, off.
You know, on and off, absolutely. Got paid a lot of money for that. But in terms of advice to people in the room, we can talk about the fancy systems and we can talk about the fancy technology. Fundamentally, it's do the basics right, you know, and that will probably keep you out of trouble more often than not. Would that be right?
Exactly, yeah. Cyber hygiene is, we call it cyber hygiene. So if a company doesn't have a security maturity, what we call is do a health check, just like a doctor does it to you as well when it comes to personal terms. The fundamental thing there is to find your weaknesses and analyze and then work on them. Just buying products and you go for the fancy products, either your boss has done some golf course deal, is not going to protect you. It always needs to be a balance of these three: people, process, and tech.
Okay, one word answer. Can you have too much security?
No.
Right, okay, so it's one each.
Getting
right,
controversial there. So.
This is a cliffhanger. If you'd said yes, I would have been surprised then. Danny Dresner, Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Manchester, and some people will be interested to know this, the former official artist of the Blake 7 Appreciation Society. Everybody under the age of 70 is saying who are Blake 7. But you can explain later, Danny. Danny, what's the biggest problem, the threat from cyber terrorists or the fact that the systems that we've got were built inadequately in the first place, in your experience?
I think it's that inadequate thing, because I bet there isn't somebody here who hasn't sung the song that you want it fast, you want it resilient, and you want it cheap, and then ended up realizing that 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And of course, that we push for that level of perfection rather than realizing that actually we've got to compromise.
Was that Meatloaf? 2 out of 3 ain't bad?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jewish mother, I'm familiar with the Meatloaf.
Okay. The point you're making, though, is that you can have a fast system, a resilient system, and a secure system. And it's the latter that's falling by the wayside, which is probably the reason why we're getting into trouble in the first place. People aren't prepared to wait. Would that be fair?
Aren't prepared to wait, or perhaps don't realize that the bad thing's going to happen. So perhaps the most important thing that we need to do is we have to remember the C word. Don't look at me like that. It's cope.
Cope?
We have to cope with the bad things that happen. We have to be ready to absorb problems, not add to them, particularly by blaming and getting on the phone and spending all day on the phone saying, why is my system not working? I'm trying to fix it. Why is it not working? Well, I can either speak to you and explain why it's not working, or I can fix it.
Right. Is this how you talk to your students at the university?
No, we use physical violence there.
Okay. I was just, and there aren't many people who use physical violence whilst wearing a bow tie. I think that, lulls them into a false sense of security. Now, what are you teaching your students at the university other than self-defense?
The single most important thing that they have to remember is what their objectives are. Essentially, there are 3 laws, rules, or principles to cybersecurity. One is, we've got to do the protection stuff. We've got to kind of have the technology and the people involved working together so that when bad things happen, that they can recover, or that there should be some self-preservation. But the most important thing in the middle is that they've got to purify our water, they've got to calculate our pensions, they've got to give us our Zoom calls. So operations, people have got to remember what it is that the systems are there for. So the problem being, of course, is that most people give their cyber responsibilities to IT, and they just end up it's not the man from Del Monte. They're more kind of Dr. No.
You can use examples from the last 20 years as well, Danny. I feel as though I got them on the wrong foot with Blake 7. We heard from Ed earlier when Ed was talking about BA and the £20 million fine that they got for the 2018 breach as well. What's the worst thing that can happen with a breach? Can you give an example of something in the room that everyone will go around and say, whoa, I never realised that could happen?
Yeah, well, maybe it's a good job that there's bottled water on the tables, because there was a close call I think it was last year, out in Tampa in Florida, where, again, not upgrading, lack of cyber hygiene, where somebody got on the system and found that thing, that thing that you often give people permission to log into your system, and you think, wasn't that clever, the cursor's moving around. Somebody got into the water treatment plant, and they very nearly released all the purification chemicals all in one go. Fortunately, there was a bit of process involved, so people, process, technology, and that prevented it. But that was very, very close. And it's only a matter of time, unfortunately, before that happens. And for years, we know that the knock-on effects of things like WannaCry, and there was a case out in Germany where the hospital systems were down, and by the time they tried to transfer the patient to another hospital, of course, you can never be sure whether that would have been effective in the first place. It's always up to debate, but the patient died, literally. Well, died, literally.
Nice cheerful story, that, Danny. Thanks for that. That example you use in Florida is interesting because the hacker increased the levels of sodium hydroxide by 100-fold, and it was only the eagle-eyed operator spotted this cursor moving around on a key, their laptop, and realised, hang on a minute, alerted it, and that's how they picked it up, and they reduced it right to the back level again. I'm at Business Cloud, I'm at TechBlast, I've worked in Manchester for about 11 years now. Do you think that Greater Manchester's got an opportunity and the Northwest generally to be at the forefront of cybersecurity, in your opinion?
No, I think we already are. I think we already are. People think about cybersecurity, and there's an awful lot going around in a place called Cheltenham. I'm not going to break any secrets, because if you go to Cheltenham, it's actually got GCHQ on the road signs. So a cyber ecosystem built up around GCHQ. Why? Because they want GCHQ money. And of course, people retire from GCHQ, set up clever, fantastic businesses, and still operate in that. The difference with Manchester is that we've created things like the Greater Manchester Cyber Foundry, which has put universities and businesses and local authorities together to work together to change cybersecurity from fear, uncertainty, and doubt into actually a method for business growth. We're just launching a permanent home for cybersecurity in the city centre, the Digital Security Hub, the DISH. So we've actually built up a cyber ecosystem of our own, and GCHQ has come to us.
Well, that's more positive, wouldn't it? You know, you've stunned them into silence. Final question for your good self. Well, I've got two quick ones. We hear a lot about the recruitment crisis. You know, there's a real challenge. In fact, if anyone's interested, I've just been asked a question on Slido. It said, Chris, when are you next hosting an event? Actually, the answer is next Wednesday. I'm hosting an event entitled The Great Renegotiation. Is HR Director the hardest job in the world? Tickets still available, 29th of June at KPMG. Find it on Eventbrite or all good platforms. But the question that I was going to ask you is the recruitment crisis. You know, is the recruitment crisis in cybersecurity going to hold us back?
Well, as I always say on Question Time, I'm glad you asked me that question, because for a start, we've actually got 2 jobs going at the Greater Manchester Cyber Foundry at the moment. We're looking for an enterprise analyst and a project manager. So anybody here wants to change a career, or they know someone, these are a couple of great opportunities in Manchester. But I think one of the problems is that people don't understand cybersecurity. It often goes into the hands of HR. I mean, this is a prof saying this. You don't need a degree. Shock horror. So we put up all of these bars. We ask for 5 years of experience for entry-level jobs. What we need to remove the bars completely. We need to be innovative. We need to be understanding and look for the aptitudes of people to develop, and stop this send me a copy of your CV and these interview panels, often of people who are looking for actually perfection rather than actually realizing, I know this is what I tell my students, this is a two-way thing. You've got talents, you've got interest. Let's show the people who you talk to and who you meet that you are ready to learn from them. They should be ready to learn from you. It's a mutual thing, because let's face it, the criminals work together. We should be working together. I mean, how many criminals don't actually do a heist until they've thought of a sexy name for it? I mean, every project we think up, I mean, what's the first board meeting they're taken up with? Thinking of an acronym.
I thought you were going to ask a question. How many people in the room are criminals? That's what I was worried.
I'm in cybersecurity, I know.
That's what I was worried you were going to ask. Danny, final question, one word answer. Can you have too much security?
Not the reason that you were probably thinking of, but no.
No, okay, more than one answer, but that's 2 no's and 1 yes. That's interesting. Final speaker. I'm only going to ask you 3 questions because you spoke earlier, but I thought it was topical. How do I pronounce your name first? That's not one of the questions. Is it Elvira Uyarra?
Yes.
Okay, you sound surprised. Okay, it's your name. You're
Vaguely.
the Professor of Innovation Studies at the Alliance Manchester Business School. Interesting fact about your good self, actually. You came to Manchester for 6 months 20 years ago, and you've never left, because obviously you're Spanish. You spoke earlier today, but just tell us about a research project that you're doing regarding companies' approach to investment on cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the weather was so good, I never left.
Okay.
You see, it's wonderful and sunny. So I am new to cybersecurity, so I mean, everything I don't know, I'll ask him. So we're involved in this project with smart colleagues at the computer science department at Manchester University and Oxford University and the THG, formerly known as the HUD Group. And this is a project looking at how to prevent cybersecurity attacks and ensure kind of safety in the digital economy. And this is funded by the UKRI Digital Security by Design program, and basically recognizing that, you know, computer systems were not created with security in mind, and we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem that, in order to make safer software, you need better infrastructure and the other way around. So the goal of this project is to demonstrate this cool technology which makes things more secure, which is the ARM developed a Morello board.
Because we spoke yesterday, didn't we? And you said to me, you said, Chris, I'm not a cybersecurity expert.
Yeah.
I said, so don't ask me any technical cybersecurity questions, but you're working with THG,
Yeah.
formerly the Hut Group. Now, the ultimate goal is that the digital world needs to be more robust against the threat
Yeah.
of cybersecurity. That's the premise, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because what we found in the lockdown is so many of us are using online,
Yeah.
and yet companies probably, and this is the purpose of the project,
Yeah.
aren't investing enough money,
Yeah.
even though two of our experts say you don't need to invest too much, So I think I've accelerated your research, to these three conversations.
we don't need to
But is
progress.
that the aim? Is that we should be investing more in our cybersecurity and not seeing it as a Cinderella service? Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the objective of this is to help kind of work with the Hut Group as they incorporate this technology and demonstrate that it works in the system. And the purpose of our side of the work as the business school is to understand how companies make decisions around cybersecurity investment. Because the problem with cybersecurity is that how do you know the counterfactual, right? How do you know your investment works? How do you make a business case to say, well, we need to invest more in cybersecurity? We agree that this is important. Because it's very difficult to know the effects, the impacts of cyber attacks in terms of the impacts on productivity, the impacts on reputational damage, things like that. How do you measure those things? So if you can't measure that, you can't make a case for investment. So we are trying to understand, yes, why companies are not investing enough, and how do you measure the impacts or the outcomes of investing more.
Now, Sam Booth is about to enter the stage. When that happens, everything goes silent. Yeah, it's interesting that you've lived in Manchester 20 years. I can hear that Gorton accent. You can just hear it. I'm thinking I know what part of Manchester she's been living for the last 20 years. One word answer, can you have too much security?
No.
No. 3 no's and 1 yes. I think that's the conclusive proof, really. So massive thanks for our 3 speakers. Massive thanks to Ed as well. We're going to hear from Ant Morse in a minute. The future of us, what next? But before then, Sam Booth is going to come onto the stage. No standing ovations, but thanks very much. Thank you.
You want me out of the way, don't you? Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. If you would like to exit that. Yeah, we have got Ant Morse next, who is going to talk about the future with us. So we're just going to set up quickly. Can I do one last reminder? This is your final chance to make your votes for your Trailblazing Tech winner. So if you can get them in now, if you haven't done already. And also, Ant, if we have time, we're going to take a few questions as well. So go onto the questions board, pop your questions in there, and we can go from there. All right. I think we might nearly be ready. So we're going to hand over to Ant. Are we? That was a great session, a really good session, a really good laugh, and a good way to end the final panel session of the day as well. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say here on the from Virgin Media O2.